Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm LaShawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching. All right, so today we are going to talk about some themes that are related to Memorial Day. We're actually recording this episode on Memorial Day. And historically and traditionally, Memorial Day is a day of remembrance. It's a day of appreciation as well, where we think about the people who have given their lives defending the country, died in military service. It started out with Civil War, and then it branched out to all of the wars. And so today we are going to be touching on the themes of Memorial Day. And as usual, we'll just see where the conversation takes us. We'll start with Memorial Day and those themes of appreciation, remembrance, reflection, and go from there. So Eryn, what comes to mind? If we just look at Memorial Day, what does that mean to you? And what are your thoughts on this day?
Yeah, I think first I want to say a big thank you and heartfelt gratitude to all of the people that have served in so many different capacities across time and who are currently doing so in many ways. So whether that's the military or local nonprofits or whatever it may be, really honoring and feeling that gratitude for the people who can step forward and serve their communities, serve globally. And I think that's what my initial response to this holiday kind of starts to really resonate with me from that perspective. And then as I continue to root into feeling and thinking about this holiday, it starts to go a little bit closer to my own life, the people that I've lost, my grandmother passing this past February, and then just the people that not only have lost more recently, but also the ancestors and how important they've been to my own history and my own life. And again, that brings me back to a space of gratitude. And it brings me to a space of also that feeling of a little bit of dissociation in that, okay, I'm feeling a lot and I feel overwhelmed and flooded. And now I need to find a way to be able to root into myself without trying to numb those feelings, but also let them overcome me too much. So this day also for me brings a lot of the back and forth emotionally and how I respond to my own thinking and feelings about, individuals and the human face behind everything. And that's, I think, where I'll conclude with your question is there is a human face behind each of these losses, and just recognizing the interconnectivity of us all and the humanness of us all as we are, oh no, I'm going to bring this up, broken, open. We talked about this in a previous episode. And then also we are human and have a short time here. So a lot kind of comes to mind with this holiday. And I think it's an important one that we are honored to observe. So LaShawn, on your end, as you were, introducing Memorial Day and this topic, and then now where are you at with the topic and what really stands out to you? And how has Memorial Day gone for you, maybe this year and in the past?
Because I spent so much time in Japan, it just wasn't a day that we really, of course, being an American holiday, we really it was even on our radar for a really long time. And actually coming back to the United States after being in Japan for so long and even thinking about what it means for me to be American and what Memorial Day is, and just thinking about those days of remembrance. And it just seems really strange to me to say Happy Memorial Day, because it's a more sober feeling of remembrance, reflection, but at the same time, unofficially, it is seen as the first day of summer. So there's the juxtaposition of the sacredness of, you mentioned ancestors, really taking the time to show appreciation and also recognizing loss, because it is about fallen soldiers. It is about people who have lost their lives in battle. And then it even comes back to the idea of there even being wars, and that even having to be a necessary thing even now. So there's so much that comes up for me in terms of what historically and traditionally what Memorial Day is. And also just coming back into the culture from being in a culture that, of course, being Japanese is not going to recognize Memorial Day, but there's that getting back into that tradition. And so in the past, Memorial Day has been barbecues and playing at the pool, going to the park, so those kind of things, like remembering family, not necessarily people who have died in wars, but just remembering family. But there's just so much for me that's associated with Memorial Day. And then there's also the reflection as well, reflecting on where we are at and reflecting on where we are at as a nation. And even looking back to community, the neighborhood parties and things like the block parties just don't seem to happen, at least not in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods that I know of. There doesn't seem to be that community aspect of Memorial Day that it was when I was growing up. So those are some things that I think about related to Memorial Day. And then to go back to what you were saying, Eryn, about the feelings that are associated with Memorial Day, and then how coaching can be applied to that, and how we could work with coaches, counselors, therapists, and we can explore those feelings that we are experiencing. And then, of course, a part of many holidays, for me especially, is the idea of getting together with family. And there's a lot related to that as well. So those are things that come up for me when I think about Memorial Day. And right now, more than anything, it just feels a little bit isolated in terms of that there's just different people in their families or in their groups that they do things, but there doesn't seem to be like a community aspect to it anymore. And that's just my experience. Almost like I was looking at my news feed today, and there wasn't, I think I couldn't, I actually had to search for Memorial Day. There weren't any like news articles or anything on Memorial Day in my news feed. That could just be my news feed. But it's just interesting that it's almost like it's not Memorial Day. It's weird. So yeah, a lot of weird things, a lot of different emotions, just like you were saying, Eryn. Those are the things that are coming up for me. Anything else that you'd like to add, or anything that's coming up for you as I'm talking about Memorial Day for me and what it means?
I think just reiterating how you talked about the communal aspect and then the individual aspect, and how maybe the community one is missing in some ways for different people and within our, culture and different aspects. And I think that that's what Memorial Day really kind of points to on a broader fundamental understanding of our feelings, is this kind of like holding both the loneliness of loss and also the community support of loss. And when you bring those two together, it can be really powerful, right? And like the barbecues and things can be a really powerful way to celebrate life. On the other end, sometimes that reflective alone space can also be healing. And it's finding what's going to work for people individually within both of those. But your point about the lack of community, I think, is very clear in that since COVID, it's just been a lot less of, I think, in general, food oriented gatherings. Whether that's Memorial Day or even like people eating at restaurants or whatever it may be, it just seems, at least where I am in Colorado, that seems to be the case. There's a little less of that. And I can just say, from my own understanding, I point to it as maybe since COVID. It's interesting with LaShawn, you coming back after 20 years in Japan and you noticing this gap kind of from 20 years ago to now too. Clearly that's not COVID, but there's something there and something to maybe interrogate. So if you are feeling lonely this holiday or feel a little bit more lonely than you expected, that is a good time to meet with a coach or therapist to understand that feeling both within yourself and how that's affecting you, and then what also is going on outside of yourself and how that affects you as well, and what might be some good steps forward for yourself and how you want to move forward throughout the day, throughout the coming days, weeks, months, etc. And I really want to insert coaching here because I think coaching as a modality is a very powerful tool for remembrance and loss and Memorial Day. And we often don't go to coaching for that. We think therapy or maybe something really feelings oriented. And I just want to say, through my own experience, both as a professional coach and then receiving coaching, this is where coaching can be so impactful and so helpful for people as they navigate loneliness or whatever feelings might be coming up throughout the holiday. And so I guess one of the coaching modalities or tools is that ability to interrogate and perspective shift and be curious about what the feeling is and how that's affecting us and what we might need to do in the moment or in the following days. So that's just one just general coaching kind of piece to add in here. And Memorial Day, right? There's the other piece that coaching might fit into, and that's the complexity of relationships that Memorial Day holds for so many people. So family relationships can be some of the most difficult and hard to navigate. And again, coaching tools can be a really good help for that. But the relationships to our past, our ancestors, ourselves, kind of these more ethereal, spiritual relationships that really make us take a look at ourselves and understand our humanity and really maybe question some things as well in terms of where we're at in the world, what's to come after, and those types of things. And I do think, at least for me, that tends to really bubble up on Memorial Day, more so than other holidays. And so those questions about the self and about one's place in the world, one's place in the history of their ancestors. Again, all of those types of questions fit really well with the coaching approach. So that's where I would expand on the coaching piece. LaShawn, do you want to add any more on coaching here?
Staying in that same vein of questions, just asking questions about our beliefs as well, because our beliefs and values, because I think that Memorial Day also is a reflection of beliefs and values as well. Anytime you're looking at like your ancestors, you're looking at your space of gratitude, I think that is connected to values and beliefs as well. Even just asking questions about that, and also asking questions about how those beliefs and values are showing up in your life and how you would like them to show up in your life. And I want to also bring back the reflection piece as well. I think you can use coaching as a process of reflection as well, in terms of looking at past days, Memorial Days, looking at how, that's changed and evolved as you have grown, or as you maybe as an adult, as you're starting to create your own traditions. You might take from traditions from your family. If you're married or you have a partner, there's also that, like, how do you blend the traditions? And so there's so much in there in terms of how days like Memorial Day, or how our ancestors, how our beliefs and how our values affect how we live our lives and what we think about where our lives are, and where we're showing up, how we're showing up. Can we show up differently? And then there's also, on the other side of that, there's just being present with where you are in life. And there's the act of appreciation and taking stock of the things that you have, and where that is connected with your ancestors, what your ancestors have made possible in your life. There's that too. So I think there's so much that can be gained from using powerful questions, reflections, observations. If you're working with a coach, having a conversation with a coach, and then the coach can then reflect back what they hear, what they observe. And that can also help you get deeper into meaningful aspects of your life that you may not be aware of. And so that can raise our awareness by working with a thought partner like a coach. I think it's very powerful when you are having a conversation, a meaningful conversation about a topic. So for example, like Memorial Day, with a coach, and the coach reflects back what they're hearing. You might hear something that you haven't really taken into account, or maybe you've taken for granted because you're experiencing it, or it's something that you're so familiar with that you don't even consider it. And then when it's reflected back to you, it adds another layer of perspective and then also another layer of understanding. When you have a conversation with a coach and they reflect back something to you, it can be eye-opening, and it can also help reveal some things that maybe you were not aware of. And then it leads to clarity. It can lead to clarity. So for example, I was talking to a coach, and I was talking about a memory of when I was in school, and together the coach and I reimagined that memory. And I imagined as the like 9-year-old in that memory that I had my adult self and I was talking to my adult self. And I was talking to my adult self and looking at my adult self. And that coach said, it seems like you needed permission to do something. And that word permission wasn't something I was even cognitive of. I didn't really understand that. It wasn't something that I was thinking about. But when she reflected that back to me, it revealed some things about my own behavior as an adult that helped me understand how I sometimes ask for permission or I want permission before I do something. And in that revelation, I was able to deepen my healing and my learning even about myself. And I was able to change my behavior in a way where I could then be aware, oh, I'm asking for permission here. I'm an adult. I don't need to ask for permission. I can do this. And this really being very aware of my behavior and the motivation behind my behavior. So that's just an example of how talking to a coach can reveal things that you may not be aware of. And once you're aware of it, when they reflect back to you, something that they notice or they observe without judgment, and that's what's really important. There's no judgment there. It's just they're observing something and they're sharing that with you. It can really lead to some really deep healing and shifts in the way that you show up in the world. Eryn, any thoughts?
Yeah, so my sitting positions looks probably quite different right now because I'm on the floor in it.
That's all right. You look
I
comfortable.
realize I'm too old for that. I am too old for that. But anyway, so LaShawn, sorry.
No worries. You look comfortable.
But anyway, one thing, maybe that comfort, like you said, comfortable, because as you were talking, for some reason, this idea of coaching being a modality for you at kind of any space you're in, not only when you feel like you are struggling or in need of support. As you were talking, that was really starting to resonate with me more so than it has in a while, because I tend to, in my own lens, work with people who are in the grief space. But coaching, generally, the modality of it is effective when you're in any space. And so when we think about Memorial Day and people who maybe are enjoying the holiday, feeling what they need to feel, celebrating life in the way that they want and need to, coaching can still come in and meet them where they're at by giving them the question or asking the questions that are necessary to have the objective feedback, like you talked about, for people to continue on that growth. And I know something that's a little bit problematic with this in that, about 6 or 7 years ago, a man wrote an article about how coaching was increasing the equity gap because top executives, top athletes, top therapists all had their own coaches, where then they would just grow exponentially, even being at the top of their game anyway. And for the rest of the people who couldn't afford the coach or haven't been introduced to coaching as much, there was this gap in terms of their ability to actualize their own skills and that sort of thing. And so I think that coaching is something for the masses in that way, and that it can help people really increase what they're wanting to improve at or shift. And oftentimes you don't even have to know that, because the coach is your companion and your partner to collaborate with you and draw out of you what's really happening, what's your inner voice is really saying that might need to shift or might need to be added to. And so I like what you talked about there, LaShawn, about how that coach reflects, back, and you as the coach do that from a neutral position, not from a place of judgment. And I think that's important to talk about here, because when we think about getting help from someone or from going to the doctor or someone else, it's always like, oh, I'm going to be judged. I don't want to go do that. Whereas one of the kind of main strategies as a coach that we're trained in is humbleness. And I want to highlight that because I had a training at CU with Christian Van Nuremberg, who's one of the kind of pioneers in the coaching field and in positive psychology from England, and has done work all over the world. But he gave a talk, and all the talk was about was being humble. It was all about the coach's disposition and what that looks like. And I think it was a little unexpected for some people, because he being flown in and to come talk to a crowd. And it just has resonated with me even to this day that was the kind of topic that he really talked about is, the coach way of being. And he talks about this in his research as well. And it's called the coach way of being. And it's about, how the coach embodies that humbleness, but also the coaching practices themselves. And, that's why coaches have coaches, right? Too, and work with people to help them perspective shift. Because I think by that sense of way of being, it helps us with one of the main coaching skills that we've talked about on this podcast being curiosity. It helps us take that position of curiosity to better understand. And I notice that like the farther out I get from my like home space where I'm most comfortable, it's harder. It's harder, right? When we're kind of pushed out of our comfort zones. And I'm saying that right now, right? Traveling, it's harder for me to be curious than it is when I'm in my comfortable space. And I think that's another point of coaching that I'm grappling with here as I travel this week, how to bring those skills along. They're always a part of me. And how do I actualize those a little bit more overtly, potentially, than what I have to really put the effort into back home. So yeah, it's all about, goes back to the growth zone that LaShawn and I had a podcast episode on this year. And when we're out of our comfort zone, we're in growth zone, and that can't always feel that good. But when we notice that and try to really understand that and make shifts, right, like that's where we have our best opportunities for our personal growth and our opportunities to make shifts. So I guess I'll tie it back to the original topic here of Memorial Day and just consider, so many people, I think this is one of the most traveled holidays, right? And there's so many people traveling by air or on the road. And as you are in these new environments, and when I say new, maybe they're environments you've been to before, but just not the environments you're typically in every day. What do you notice about yourself? I think it can be really telling. And that is a good question to really understand and grapple with a coach or a friend or somebody who can really help push you in that way to better understand yourself. So yeah, a lot on coaching Memorial Day. LaShawn, I'll bounce it back to you.
There's so much there. One thing that I really piqued my interest was what you said about being out of your comfort zone. And I think that holidays, Memorial Days, these type of events in our lives do take us out of our comfort zone. And they can take us out of our comfort zone, I should say. They can take us out of our comfort zone because it's out of the routine, right? I mean, that's why it's a observed day. People have the day off of work. If they work for the government, you have the day off of work. If you work for a bank, you have the day off of work. So it's a time where you are out of your routine. And it is a time when you could be with friends and loved ones, neighbors, family. And so you're showing up differently. And I do think that that's a really good opportunity to examine how you are in a new environment or a new routine or a new activity so that you would normally be in. Traveling is another really good example of how we get out of our comfort zone. You are relying on another person if you're flying, if you're maybe driving with a family or friends. There's a lot of compromise that comes with travel. There's a lot of patience that's required in travel with delays, with weather, with all the things that can not go according to plan when we're traveling. And then there's also the resilience of that, and there's also the ability to adapt and to remain buoyant. That's something that's come up in our talks a lot. The idea of buoyancy. Those things present themselves when you're traveling, when you're on holiday, or when you are for example, celebrating a holiday or Memorial Day. So that's something that came up for me as well. Like these moments in our lives, which come annually or once in a while, these are moments of where we might have time to reflect. We might have time to observe maybe other people. You can observe other people. You can observe your children. You can observe your friends, your family, and really reflect on how are we showing up as a family in this holiday. Are we spending more time together? Are we spending less time together? Are we stressed? Are we bickering more? Like, how is that showing up? And then again, the curiosity piece. And then you mentioned, Eryn, being humble. And I think that's important too, because it's really difficult to be judgmental if we're humble. If we take the stance of we don't have all the answers, we are learners in this. We are not coming with all the right ways to do things. We're just we're also figuring out ourselves. So I think coming in with the curiosity, coming in with the humility, I think is really important as well. So those are really important concepts to think about when we are in a space of newness, novelty. Like we don't really, when we travel, things are going to be different. We're also in different environments than we normally are in. Airports, stations. We might be at like a amusement park or something, or a public pool. So those are not like everyday things unless you're like a lifeguard or you work in the hospitality industry. But if it's not a normal thing that you do, then you can really take the time to see, oh, how am I showing up, or how are we as a group showing up? So those are some opportunities for growth and opportunities for learning about ourselves and also about the people that we surround ourselves with. I think those are great opportunities that days like Memorial Day can bring. So yeah, those are some things that are coming up for me as you were talking, Eryn. Profound topics, especially related to being in new environments, or having different experiences when you are on holiday or when you're celebrating a holiday. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add about this topic, or anything that's come up since I've been talking?
Well, you mentioned the observing your kids or observing others too, which I think can be helpful from a place of non-judgment, and then using those same skills to do that within ourselves too. I think it can be really powerful. And then just holding space for yourself. If you need to go take a break, if you need to go on a walk, if you need to take a bath, whatever it might be to reset or restore, if you want to go read a book, whatever it is, I think that can sometimes be forgotten this time of year, especially for traveling in different scenarios. So just taking care of your own needs and self can be another powerful tool. And again, it doesn't have to be thought about or created about alone. I think when you co-construct the strategy with the coach on the self-care, you come up with something that's highly tailored to your needs and something that you're more likely to do, rather than having some ambiguity about what it is. Oh, I could do this, or I could take a walk, or maybe this would be more helpful. Kind of knowing ahead of time what is going to work for you best can also be a good strategy in the toolbox in terms of your travel schedule, or just this time of year, or even just every day being a human. So I think that would be the only other thing that I would add here. And I think the tradition, I just want to plug, this is a little bit more in the grief space than necessarily the coaching, but honoring the traditions and sharing that with your kids, I think can be important. I know some people ask, well, should kids be exposed to this, or should we, be taking them to put flowers at grave sites, or, and obviously that's a nuance. There's no black and white answer here, but I do think we need to expose our kids to death practices just as we would any other life circumstance. So I think it's beautiful to bring your kids and help, and they can help put flowers at grave sites if that's what your family does to honor those, or maybe it's just telling stories about those you've lost. You can include your kids in those stories as well. So that would be just a kind of an aside. It's not exactly coaching, but it's more grief focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Memorial Day is a kind of collective grieving, or understanding loss, knowing that other people might touch them differently than others, and more directly, because if you have people in your family who served in the military and died in the military, you are going to feel Memorial Day differently than someone who doesn't have that or who has had that, but it's so far removed from their current circumstance that, like, for example, if they had family that died in World War I, World War II, then it's going to be a little bit more distant than someone who died in in Afghanistan or some of the more recent wars. I think that definitely there is the idea of the empty place at the table. I think there's an empty place. There's many empty places at the table of our nation. And I think there is a kind of at the macro level, the idea of how we want to honor people who have fought and died for what our country stands for, or there's a huge conversation about that. But when we think about Memorial Day, we think about honoring those who have made what is called the ultimate sacrifice. That's a very deep and profound loss as a nation that I think we should all have that conversation with the youth and with, people in our lives, because I think it is important for us to continue that tradition, I believe. And one of the things, Eryn, you say a lot is that we have all kinds of different types of educations in the schooling system, but one of those is not grief education. And I think we could begin a new tradition of talking to our children about loss and really having that experience together. I think that is something to consider as well. And I think this does bring us into the part of our episode of Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom, because it does seem like we're circling back to the original topic. So it does kind of feel like this would be a good time to do Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom. And I guess I can go since I kind of brought it up. But one thing that I would say as a Coaching Nugget of Wisdom, just the very nature of this episode has been one of reflection and one of exploration. And one of appreciation as well. So I would say of those three, reflection, exploration, appreciation, which of those resonates most with you? And how would you expand on that? So if it's appreciation, what is it about appreciation that resonates? If it's reflection, what is it in this time that resonates related to reflection? And if it's exploration, again, what is it that's resonating in that? So, Eryn, what are your coaching nuggets of wisdom?
I love that. I don't even know what I could add to that, because I really like how you put that with the three and then the questions on top of that. So it's reflection, appreciation, and exploration. And I guess for some reason, I'm just feeling a question, and I don't quite have it formed wholly. So let me see if I can get there. I guess something about what brings you into your, and I keep saying best self in my head, and I don't like that. So what brings you into your most coach-like self, I guess, based on those qualities of, appreciation, reflection, and exploration? What helps you get there?
I love it. The inner coach.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Michelle Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.